The number she left on the ledger was wrong by exactly 47 cents, and that was how Nadia Farre knew the accountant before her had been stealing. She didn't say anything. She circled it in red pencil, old habit, the kind they beat into you at community college when you couldn't afford the real university, and set the file on the corner of her desk at Belcastle Catering and Supply, where she had worked for 6 years, where she had started as a dishwasher and ended up keeping the books because the owner, Mr. Petrov, said she had the kind of eyes that catch things. She caught a lot of things. She caught the way the produce invoices were being doubled on alternating Thursdays. She caught the ghost employee on payroll, a man named Earl Simmons, who had not showed up to work since 2019 because he did not exist. She caught the slow bleed of cash from the register at the Midtown location, small enough each week that you'd never notice unless you were looking at the full year laid flat in front of you like a body on a table. Nadia was always looking at the full year. What she didn't catch, what she had somehow catastrophically missed, was that Damien, her fiancé of 2 years, had been lying to her for most of them. She found out at the rehearsal dinner. Not from him, from his mother, who had too much white wine and leaned across the table and said, in the bright, careless voice of a woman who assumed everyone already knew, "So is Janelle coming to the ceremony. I always liked her better for you, honestly." Nadia had smiled. She was very good at smiling when she didn't understand what was happening. It was a survival skill she'd developed early, growing up in a house where not understanding something could get you screamed at. "I'm not sure," she said carefully. Damien's mother patted her hand. "Oh, don't be like that. It was years ago. Men just, you know how they are." She didn't know. She found out 3 hours later, when she went through Damien's phone while he was in the shower and discovered that Janelle was not years ago. Janelle was last Tuesday. Janelle was a woman who sent voice memos instead of texts, low and warm and entirely too familiar, and the most recent one began with, "I can't believe you're actually going through with it." Nadia sat on the edge of the hotel bathtub and listened to the whole thing. Then she put the phone back exactly where she'd found it, smiled through the rest of the night, went back to her own room, and did not sleep. She got married anyway. People always want to know why. She's thought about it a lot in the months since. The honest answer is that she'd already paid the deposit on the venue. The honest answer is that her mother had driven 11 hours from Tulsa and was sleeping 3 rooms down the hall and had cried when Nadia showed her the dress. The honest answer is that she was 28 years old, and she had spent the last 6 years quietly fixing other people's mistakes for a salary that barely covered rent, and somewhere in the back of her mind she had convinced herself that Damien was the one thing in her life she hadn't miscounted. She was wrong. She was wrong in the way you're wrong about a balance sheet. When you've been staring at it so long, the numbers stop making sense. She was wrong in the quiet, humiliating way, not dramatically, not with screaming or thrown dishes, just wrong, the way facts are wrong. A number that doesn't add up, a column that will never, no matter how many times you check it, come out even. The ceremony was at a venue called the Harwood, a converted textile mill on the edge of the River District in Chicago. It had exposed brick and Edison bulbs and a catering team she had personally vetted, because that was the kind of thing Nadia did. She had vetted the flowers, the photographer, the DJ, the cake. She had built a spreadsheet with 17 tabs. She had not vetted Damien. She was standing in the bridal suite when it happened, 40 minutes before the ceremony. Her mother had just stepped out to find safety pins, and Nadia was alone in front of the mirror in her dress. A simple thing, ivory, no train, because she'd never liked excess, and she was looking at her own face and thinking, very clearly, "You could leave." She didn't leave. She went downstairs. She walked up the aisle. She stood at the altar and watched Damien's face arrange itself into something that looked like love, and she thought, 47 cents. That's how it starts. Small enough that you don't notice until you're looking at the whole year at once. She said her vows. He said his. The officiant had just opened his mouth to begin the final words when the doors at the back of the room opened. The noise they made was not loud. It was just final. The kind of sound that ends conversations. Nadia did not turn around at first. She watched Damien's face instead. She watched it go white. That was how she knew it was something real. She turned. The man who walked in wore a dark suit, the kind that didn't come off a rack. He was tall, not imposingly so, just enough that your eyes found him first in any room. His hair was grey at the temples. There was a scar along the left side of his jaw, thin and old, the kind that had been there long enough that it had become part of the face rather than a mark on it. He walked with the particular stillness of a man who had never needed to hurry. Because things waited for him. Behind him were two other men. They didn't do anything. They just stood there. He stopped at the edge of the aisle. His eyes went to Damien first. Something passed between them, not words, just information, the way numbers communicate across a ledger. Then he looked at Nadia. "Miss Farre," he said. She had never seen him before in her life. "That's me," she said, "because what else do you say?" His name was Calloway. She learned that in the next 4 minutes, which were the strangest 4 minutes of her life, and she had once spent 20 minutes hiding in a walk-in freezer during a health inspection, that she knew they were going to fail. He didn't explain himself at the altar. He walked forward, slowly, and everyone in the room sat very still, the way people sit still near something they don't understand. He stopped 3 feet from her and said, in a voice that was not loud and did not need to be, "Your groom owes me a significant amount of money." Nadia looked at Damien. "How much?" she said. Not a question. Habit. Calloway named a number. She did the mental math in under 3 seconds. It was give or take compounding interest at a rate she was guessing at, approximately what Damien had claimed to have made in the last 2 years. She thought about the apartment he'd moved into last spring, the one he said was a good deal. She thought about the car. "I see," she said. "There's a way to make this simple," Calloway said. She looked at him. He was watching her with the expression of someone used to reading people the way she read numbers, not looking for what was on the surface, but for what the surface was hiding. It was an uncomfortable expression to be on the receiving end of. She was used to being the one who did the reading. "Simple for whom?" she said. The corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile. The ghost of an acknowledgement. "Come with me," he said. "Leave the debt behind. The groom can sort out his own problems." "That's not simple," she said. "That's a different problem." "It is," he agreed. "But it's a problem you'd be solving from a better position." Nadia looked around the room. Her mother was in the 3rd row, holding her bouquet from when Nadia had handed it off, and she was watching with the expression of a woman trying very hard not to understand what was happening. The bridesmaids had gone still in the way of people in photographs. The photographer was either very professionally continuing to take pictures or had completely frozen. She couldn't tell which. Damien still hadn't looked up. She thought about Janelle's voice memo. "I can't believe you're actually going through with it." She looked back at Calloway. "What exactly are you offering?" she said. He reached into his jacket and produced a card. Heavy stock, no logo, just a number. He held it out to her. She took it. "The car is outside," he said. "It will be there for 10 minutes. Then he turned and walked back out the same way he'd come in, and the 2 men followed him, and the doors made that sound again, and the room was silent for what felt like a very long time. Nadia looked down at the card. She looked at Damien, who finally looked up, and his face was doing something complicated that she recognized from the last hour of a long meeting, the expression of someone calculating whether they could still salvage the situation. She handed her borrowed earrings to her maid of honor. She picked up her bag from where it sat behind the altar. She had packed a bag that morning, a small one. Out of a habit, she didn't examine too closely. She kissed her mother on the cheek. "I'll call you," she said. She walked out before she could change her mind. The car was a black SUV with tinted windows and leather seats that smelled like cedar and something else she couldn't identify. Calloway was in the back. The 2 men were in the front. She got in and the door closed, and they were moving before she had her seatbelt on. Nobody spoke for a while. Chicago moved past the windows. She watched it. She had lived here for 6 years, and she still felt like a visitor sometimes, like she was studying the city from the outside, same as she'd studied everything else, trying to understand the logic of it, the pattern underneath the noise. "You're not afraid," Calloway said. "I'm terrified," she said. "I'm just quiet when I'm terrified." He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, very slightly, the way a figure shifts when you've been adding the wrong column. "Why did you follow me?" he said. "Because you were the only person in that room who didn't lie to me today," she said. That's a low bar, but it was the only one available. He was quiet for a moment. "You know what I do," he said. It wasn't a question. "I know what you're adjacent to," she said. "I keep books for a catering company that services half the private events in this city. You learn to recognize patterns. And you got in the car anyway." "I was already married to someone who was stealing from you," she said. "Being in the car seems statistically safer than being in the building." He didn't respond to that immediately. She had the sense that he was filing it somewhere, the way she filed things. Not forgetting, not deciding, just storing. For later. The car stopped in front of a building she recognized as belonging to a holding company that had 3 names on the door of its office suite downtown. She knew this because she had catered the opening dinner 3 years ago, and she had noticed the names because the invoice had been paid in 48 hours, which almost never happened, and things that happened quickly and cleanly tended to stick in her memory. "Come in," Calloway said. "I'll explain the arrangement." The arrangement, as he explained it in an office with no personal items on the desk and a view of the river, was this. He needed someone who was not connected to his organization to manage a specific set of accounts. Not criminal accounts, the legitimate side, the businesses that existed to make other businesses legible to tax authorities and financial institutions. His current person was leaving. He had been looking for a replacement. He had known about Damien's debt for several months. He had known about Nadia because Damien apparently could not stop talking about the woman he lived with who caught every mistake. "You investigated me," she said. "I looked into you," he said. "There's a distinction. What's the distinction?" "Investigation implies suspicion," he said. "I was curious." She thought about that. "What did you find?" "That you have a talent for finding things people don't want found," he said, "and that you've been significantly underpaid for it." That was true. It was also the kind of observation that felt like a door opening in a hallway she'd thought was a wall, and she didn't entirely trust it. "What's the arrangement?" she said. "Specifically." "Terms," he told her. The salary made her throat close briefly. The terms were 3 months, with option to extend. She would have her own office, her own access codes, her own protocols. She would not be asked about things outside her accounts. She would not be introduced to people she didn't need to know. "And if I find something," she said, "in the accounts, something wrong." "You tell me," he said, "no one else." "And then what?" "And then I handle it," he said, "the way things get handled." She looked at him across the desk. He looked back. He had the patience of a man who had spent a long time in rooms where patience was the difference between walking out and not walking out. "I want a written contract," she said. "Nothing that can be used against me in court, obviously, but something with terms I can point to." "Obviously," he said, and for the first time she heard something in his voice that might have been amusement, buried deep, like a line item in a footnote. She signed the contract 2 days later, once she had read it 4 times and made 3 changes that he accepted without argument. She started the following Monday. The work was not what she expected, which was to say it was exactly the work she already knew how to do, just at a scale she hadn't worked at before. The accounts were clean on the surface and complex underneath, layered the way legitimate financial structures always were when someone smart had built them. Not to hide things, but to make the real numbers legible only to people who knew which layer to look at. She was good at finding the layer. Calloway was not often in the building. When he was, he did not linger. He moved through the offices the way weather moved through. You felt it before you saw it, and it was gone before you fully registered it had been there. He had a habit of appearing in her doorway in the late afternoon, when the light through the windows was going gold, and asking one specific question. Never small talk, never general, and then leaving when she answered. Why does the Portland account run a 2-week delay on reconciliation? Because the person who set it up was accounting for transport time on physical goods and forgot to update the protocol when the goods went digital. A pause. Then, fix it. She fixed it. The March figures on the 11th Street property are off. I know. I flagged it this morning. Someone is expensing personal travel under site maintenance. It's been happening since October. Longer pause. How much? She told him. Send me the file. She sent him the file. She didn't ask what happened after. She had learned, in the various jobs she'd held since she was 15 years old, that the most efficient thing you could do was focus on your own column. Other people's columns were their own problem. You noted the discrepancy. You reported it. What happened after was not your ledger to balance. The building had 12 people in it, not counting security, and most of them treated her with the neutral professional courtesy of co-workers who had learned not to ask questions. There was a woman named Bet in legal who brought her coffee on Tuesdays for no apparent reason, and Nadia accepted it because it was good coffee, and she had learned to accept small unexpected kindnesses without examining them too hard. She did not think about Damien very much. She thought about him the way you think about an arithmetic error once you've found and corrected it, with a kind of flat, factual acceptance. He had been a mistake. She had made mistakes before. The damage was containable. She thought about her mother more. She called her twice a week and answered all the questions she could answer honestly, which was most of them, and deflected the rest with a skill born from years of practice. "Are you safe?" her mother asked. "Yes," Nadia said, and this was true in the ways that mattered and uncertain in the ways she was choosing not to examine yet. "Is he good to you?" "It's a job, Mum." A pause on the line. Her mother had a particular silence she used when she was choosing not to say the thing she was thinking. Nadia had inherited it. "Okay," Mother said. The third week, Nadia found something she wasn't supposed to find. It was buried in the hospitality accounts, which was the set she'd been told were the most straightforward. It was so well hidden that she almost missed it. Not because it was sophisticated, but because it was patient. Small enough, spaced out enough, routed through enough intermediary accounts that it would have taken someone specifically looking for it to find it. She was always looking. She sat with it for half a day. She went over it 3 times. Then she went to Calloway's office, which she had been in exactly once before, and knocked. He was on the phone. He looked at her, read something in her face, said one word into the phone and hung up. "Close the door," he said. She closed it. She put the file on his desk. She watched his face as he read it. It didn't change much, a slight deepening around the eyes, a stillness that was different from his ordinary stillness, that the way a body of water changes before a storm, not obviously, just denser. When he was done, he looked up at her. "How long?" he said. 14 months, she said. "Maybe longer. I can only go back as far as I have access. Who else has seen this? No one. I came directly here." He was quiet for a moment, then, "You could have not shown me." She looked at him. "Why would I do that?" "Some people would consider it leverage. Some people are bad at math," she said. "Leverage requires a position of strength. I work for you." Something moved across his face, not quite an expression, more like the idea of one. "You could have gone to someone else with it." "I could have," she said. "But I said I'd tell you directly. I keep my agreements." He held her gaze for a long moment. She held it back. She had learned early that looking away first was a kind of concession, and she made her concessions deliberately, and only when they served her. "This is going to require some restructuring," he said. "I know. I have suggestions if you want them." A pause. "Sit down," he said. She sat. They worked through it for 3 hours. She had not expected him to want her suggestions, and then she had not expected him to actually use them, and then she had not expected him to push back on 2 of them with reasons that were, when she sat with them, correct. She pushed back on one of his corrections. He listened. He changed his position. She didn't know how to account for that on any ledger she had. At some point the light in the room had shifted from afternoon to evening, and someone had brought food. She didn't see who. And they ate while they worked in the unself-conscious way of people who are focused on the same problem. At 7:30 she looked up and realized she had completely lost track of the time, which had not happened to her in years. Maybe ever. Calloway was watching, she said. Nothing, he said. But he kept watching her, and it was the same look he'd had at the altar. Not curiosity exactly, more like recognition. Like he'd been solving for a variable and the answer had come in, and it was unexpected but correct. She looked down at the papers. "I'll have the restructuring memo done by Thursday," she said. "There's no rush." "There's always a rush," she said. "That's the thing about money. It doesn't wait." He was quiet for a moment. "You're not what I expected," he said. "You investigated me," she said. "You should have known what to expect." "I knew your numbers," he said. "That's different." She thought about that on the drive home. She had a car now, part of the arrangement, driven by a man named Holt who did not make conversation and drove well, both of which she appreciated. She thought about the distinction he'd drawn. Your numbers, not you. She thought about the files she kept, the years of other people's mistakes, caught and corrected and filed. The way she had learned to see the story in the numbers, not just the errors, but the reasoning behind them, the small human decisions that accumulated into something larger. She thought about what it would mean for someone to read her that way, to look at the numbers she'd made and find the person underneath. She didn't know how she felt about it. She noted the feeling and moved on, the way she always did with things she didn't yet have a column for. The 3-month contract ended on a Tuesday. She knew it was ending. She'd had it in her calendar since the first week. She had, in a quiet, disciplined way she didn't examine, spent the last 2 weeks preparing for either outcome, staying or leaving, so that she would not be caught unprepared in either direction. Calloway called her into his office at 4 o'clock. "The contract," he said. "I know," she said. "I'd like to extend it." She had prepared for this. She had a list of adjusted terms. He read it. He was quiet for a moment. "The salary increase is reasonable," he said. "The quarterly review clause I'll need to consider." "Take the week," she said. "I'm not going anywhere this month." He looked up. "Are you sure about that?" "I have nowhere else to be," she said. It was true, and it was also more than she usually said, and she felt it land between them in a way that had weight. He looked at her for a long moment. The office was quiet. Chicago moved outside the windows, indifferent. "The work suits you," he said, finally. "The work makes sense," she said. "That's not the same thing. What's the difference?" She thought about it. Something that suits you is something you're good at. Something that makes sense is something you can finally see clearly. He was quiet again. "There are things about this position that aren't in the contract," he said. "I know. I'm not talking about the accounts." She looked at him. He looked back. Outside, a boat went by on the river, slow and lit against the darkening water, and she watched it for a moment, this ordinary thing moving through the world in the ordinary way, and she thought about ledgers, the ones you keep and the ones you don't, and the ones that keep themselves whether you record them or not. "I know," she said again. He didn't look away. She had a policy about this. She had decided it in the first week, quietly and firmly, the way she decided most things. The work was the work, and she would not blur the edges of it, because blurred edges were how you ended up unable to see anything clearly. But she had also learned, over the course of these 3 months, that some things resisted being filed. Some things accumulated in columns you hadn't opened, and you looked up one day and the balance was not what you thought it was. "The contract terms," she said. "Send me the revised version when you're ready." "Nadia," he said. She stopped. He had not called her by her first name before. She had noticed this, in the same peripheral way she noticed most things, not as significant, just as data. She filed it and moved on. Until now. She turned back. "I don't make mistakes, I don't intend to," he said. It took her a moment. "The altar. I had other options for collecting the debt." She thought about that. "You were curious," she said, his word from the first day. "I looked into you," he said, "and I found someone I couldn't account for. That doesn't happen." She was quiet for a long moment. The boat was gone now, out of sight around the bend in the river. The light in the room was low and gold. "I make bad decisions when I'm uncertain," she said. "I need to be sure of things." "I know," he said. I've watched you work. You can't know someone from their numbers. No, he said, but you can know the shape of them. And then you watch for 3 months and the shape gets a face. She looked at him. He was not a man who asked for things. She understood this in the same way she understood most things about him, not because he told her, but because the pattern was clear if you watched it long enough. He had arranged circumstances instead. He had put a car outside. He had opened a door and waited to see if she would walk through it. She had walked through every door he'd put in front of her. She couldn't tell yet if that was good judgment or the opposite, but she was tired of making the safe calculation. She had made the safe calculation her entire life, and she had ended up standing at an altar in borrowed earrings, listening to the wrong man say the right words. She crossed the office. She put the contract terms on his desk, face down, so neither of them had to look at them. The quarterly review clause, she said. Non-negotiable. Fine, he said. And I need my own parking space. The building doesn't have assigned parking, and it's a problem. Something moved through his expression. Definitely amusement this time, no longer buried. Done, he said. She sat down across from him. The city moved outside. The numbers waited, the way they always did, patient and indifferent and waiting to be seen clearly by someone who knew how to look. Tell me about the Portland account, she said. The rest of it, not just the part I can see. He looked at her for a moment. Then he told her. She listened. She asked questions. She noted the things that didn't add up, and the things that did, and the things that couldn't be added at all, the kind that lived in a different column entirely, the one she'd been pretending wasn't there. It was late when she left. Holt was waiting at the curb, engine running, patient in the way of people who had learned to wait for things that were worth waiting for. She got in. The city moved past the windows. She thought about the ledger she'd been keeping, since she was old enough to understand that the world ran on what you owed and what you were owed, and how carefully you tracked the difference. She thought about the way some debts don't look like debts until they're paid. She looked out the window at the lit city, moving past, and she thought, the number was wrong by 47 cents, and then everything that came after. She thought she might, finally, be looking at the right column.